Namaste, Namaskaram, Vanakkam, Namo Namaha, Jai Ganesha. Please visit our website at classicalyoga.org, and there's a donate button there if you'd like to help us out. And this video this morning, we're just going to kind of do something off the cuff, talking to each other as hopefully fellow Hindus. A response to a video produced by Dr. Jeffrey Long at the Vedanta Society in New York about the Hindus' use of God. And I would say misuse. And he does recognize that there are some pros and cons to it. And at one point, Jeffrey says, we may never be in agreement with this. Well, I think if we take that attitude to all things, why not have a warrior spirit that maybe we can come to an agreement and not just play the fence? Now, from my cursory encounters with Jeffrey, he seems to be a wonderful man, highly intellectual. I mean, I really praise his scholarship. But this is a critique to try and create a more united Hindu family. That's the only goal here. It's not to disparage anyone. And I'm open to criticism as well. It's not an ad hominem attack on anybody. Right? We don't want to do that because, again, as Hindus especially, we recognize Tattvamasi, right? That thou art. That we are all this Atmana, of Satchidananda, Jyoti, Shakti, Ananda, Shanti, love, light, and energy. Om, this are we with emotions, mind, and body. And something important, obviously, that we all know is Mauna Vakya Parabrahman. There's where we unify. It's when we start to use words, right, that we run into problems. So take life seriously, but not too seriously when we use our words and have dialogues with one another. We want to do so in a good, healthy, competitive spirit. Right? But always remember, Mauna Vakya Parabrahman, Yato Vacho Nevartanteya Prapyas Manasa Saha Atmana. So let's jump right in. So, Rishi Kalidasa, who you all know his story, right? He didn't start out as a very intelligent man, quite the opposite. But through his studies and through the grace of Ma Kali and Saraswati, right, he became a rishi. And he said, Vagarta Vihiva Samprikta, words and their meanings are ever united like a marriage. Of course, in today's divorce culture, sadly, anything goes. If anything goes, anything goes. So too are Saiva Hindu Guru Patanjali, whose Yoga Sutras have been totally distorted, almost beyond recognition, with the spurious Ashtanga Yoga movement. And again, this is the problem with not taking words seriously. Remember, yoga is all about Hindu Dharma, and per se, it has nothing to do with the physical body. You can watch our other videos and podcasts on this. That's a shocker. But it's because we are not strong enough as Hindus. We're perhaps non-committal. And I find this to be a problem with many Hindus, and especially those in the Vedantic movement. Saiva Hindu Guru Patanjali, and again, he was pretty blunt, as many of our sadhus and rishis and yogis and swamis are. And he said, Sabdayanandupati vastu sunyo vikalpaha. He called people who took word knowledge devoid of facts delusional, vikalpa. No problem saying that, right? So we should have no problem today saying that today's yoga is primarily phony. Remember in Brihad Aranyak Upanishad, Asatoma Sadgamaya, which is just as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. There is truth and untruth. There is phony and real. Today's yoga is phony. 100% phony. And that is because of us as Hindus. We have capitulated rather than educated, which comes to the word God, which is a Christian word. Now, yes, there was an Anglo-Saxon small God for the many gods, such as Woden and Thor, which is where we get Wednesday and Thursday from. But when the Christians came along in the 5th, 6th century, they capitalized God to make sure that everybody knew there was only one male as opposed to goddess, creator, being, noun. You see the problem right there? It's their term. And to date, has anybody ever proved that there's a one male creator, being, noun? Not at all, huh? And the problem is further exasperated when then this God becomes basically a superficial term for anyone's view on a one male creator being. And it is that. It's not a vague or absolute term, such as our term that we should be using as Hindus, Brahman. Brahman is a neuter term for the greater forces of Satchidananda. It's not a being noun, it's a being verb. Big difference there. So we should be respecting the Christians and leave the term God to them. Now, just think of it. How ludicrous this is, if all of us as men had the same name. Wouldn't that be more than a bit confusing, right? So if somebody's using a name and in their mind they're thinking something else, well, then you've got confusion from the get-go. So, for example, for us as Hindus, if we say God and in our mind we're thinking of Shiva or Krishna or Kali, which is even worse, right? Then how disingenuous is it? How confusing that becomes. And here's the proof positive. Go to any church and just politely, confidently inform them that God is Krishna, God is Vishnu, God is Shiva, God is Kali Ma. And again, even if you don't state that up front, if you're saying God bless you to somebody, to a Christian specifically, right? And in your mind it's Krishna or Vishnu, you're really being disingenuous. You're not being upfront. Why do that? So we should be leaving this term God to the Christians. It's their term. Now, Jeffrey points out, and this is kind of illogical. It's illogical and it's kind of silly to point out that so many of our, but it's important here because he says so many have used the word God, and he obviously points to Swami Vivekananda. But I reminded him that even Swami Vivekananda, who did misuse the word God, he said that this was a very limited term. So if it's limited, why use it? I mean, we're all open to correction no matter who we are. And we don't know all those who have lived and died. We don't know exactly everything about them or the fact that they may have changed their mind. I'll admit, when I wrote my first two books, The American Dream and The Eternal Journey, A Guide to Enlightenment, I too misused the word God. My bad. But I realized that was insulting to the Christians, and it was a very limited use. It was not the best term, and it's not a term that we as Hindus should be using. So instead of continuing to pass on this misinformation, and instead of capitulating, as we continue to do as Hindus, sadly, we need to educate. We need to use our Sanskrit, Tamil, etc., Hindu terms, and leave the term God to the Christians. So Jeffrey points out that so many have used it, but here's something that we need to consider. If we look at the original Sanskrit scriptures of the Hindu Yoga Dharma, the Vedas, which obviously the Upanishads, and remember, come on, Vedantists, you don't start at the end, you start at the beginning, please. This is a problem. The Vedas, which of course are the Upanishads, the Agamas, the Tantras, the Ramayana, Mahabharata, Tirukural, Tirumantram, Puranas. If we look at those original scriptures, how many times do you see the word God? Hindus should know because we invented it. 0. No, it's not there, obviously. So yes, modern people, as Jeffrey points out, modern gurus have misused the word God. And he points out Prabhupada, the Maharishi Mahesh, Muktananda, and Subramanya Swami, and of course Swami Vivekananda. But how about Ramakrishna? Did he ever use the word God? He didn't speak English. He didn't speak Sanskrit. Something to think about. But look at those examples. Prabhupada, yes, he used God, but what did he mean? He didn't mean God Jesus. He didn't mean the Abrahamic God. He meant Krishna, the supreme being, one God. The Maharishi Mahesh, he actually extrapolated his TM from Hinduism and created this universal movement. So too with Prabhupada. Prabhupada didn't have anything nice to say about Hinduism, folks. He disparaged Hinduism. He said Hinduism is a dead religion. You can listen to some of our other videos or watch them and listen to our podcast on that. But Prabhupada was really anti-Hindu. He was all about the Hare Krishna movement. And it became a very dangerous cult. They've reformed themselves, but there's nobody to hold up as an example here. And then Muktananda, come on, folks. Those of you that have done some research into the whole phony yoga movement of today that knows there was tremendous scandals. Muktananda was one of them. Tremendous scandals. And a lot of these people have ruined the lives of many people. And then he talks about Subramanya Swami, who is a relatively recent, he died a few years back, but he was a strong advocate for Hindu Dharma, and he was a Saiva Hindu, obviously. But if you ask them today, if you asked him then, and I knew him well, and he obviously has some serious ethical problems. But if you ask them when they use the word God, who they're talking about, they're not talking about Krishna, they're talking about Shiva. So you see the problem right there? And we as Hindus, especially those in the Vedantic movement who pride themselves on their intellectual prowess, we should be using words properly. This is really semantics, another word that's constantly misused. That's the science of word knowledge. We need to be very careful with the words that we use, and all of you know you are. When it comes to money, important things in life, you don't use words casually, right? If I say, oh, give me $500, you say, what? 505, what's the difference, huh? Yeah, big difference. Huh? When push comes to shove, people are very precise with their language. So too, we should be precise when it comes to the word God and respect that that's the Christian's term. We're not Christians. Right? Now, let's look at some of the problems that I see with the modern Vedantas. Remember, you're not a Sampradaya. This is a philosophy within Hinduism. There's basically three Sampradayas: Saivas, Vaishnavas, Shaktas. We do have Smartas that incorporate the other three, but basically you're a Saiva, Vaishnava, Shakta. And it's very interesting that many in the Vedantic movement really tend to be very Vaishnava. They look to the Bhagavad Gita. And one may ask themselves, well, why is this so? Because you look at someone that they hold up in high regard as Adi Shankara. And if you look at any depictions of Adi Shankara, there's a Saiva Hindu there. And today's Vedantist Swamis, etc., they are basically devoid of markings. So there's really a sense of non-committalness here. And or it's really, I think, what you find in Vaishnavism a lot. You find it in Saivism to some extent, but not like Vaishnavism. This kind of fundamentalist, universalist attitude. And they'll use the word God, and you have to ask them who they're thinking about when they use that. Could be Vishnu, Krishna, etc. That becomes all things. So it's really a fundamentalist, universalist attitude. Now, I'm using our iPad here. We don't have any high-tech equipment here. I mean, we're struggling financially. I just use the iPad. And we're running out of time here. So I think I'll have to do a part 2, because we only have a few minutes here on the iPad. But, again, I don't want to disparage Professor Long here. He seems like a wonderful, wonderful man. But our goal here is to create a united Hindu family, Saiva, Vaishnava, Shakti, the three. So let us live in harmony and follow the Dharma and plant your yoga tree, because we all do karma, bhakti, raja, jnani. Swami Vivekananda was famous for that. This is Hindu Dharma. Om Shanti. Ganapati Murga Shiva Shakti. Ganapati Krishna Vishnu Lakshmi. Ganapati Hanuman Sitaram. Durga Lakshmi Saraswati. Kali Durga Parvati. So we'll see you in part 2. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Asatoma Sadgamaya. Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya. Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Mauna Vakya Parabrahman.